Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whichever of the 5 continents you're currently sitting on. From the great state of Tennessee in the southeast quadrant of the United States, my name is Dennis Houchin, and we'll be discussing a topic of vital importance to each one of us, the art of cyberwar. We'll be looking at it through the lens of a 2,500-year-old manuscript on military movements. Our objectives today are to review the 21st century cyber threatscape. We're going to see who the bad guys are and what they're up to, how they're trying to attack us, and what we are doing to defend against them. We're going to learn something about the global efforts to mitigate these attacks. We're also going to learn, most importantly, what you're going to be able to do to improve your own security posture and the security posture of those you work with. And finally, we're going to learn to apply some of the strategic thinking from the art of war to the cybersecurity field. Let's first talk just a minute about the art of war. The Art of War is a manuscript written by Sun Tzu back in about 500 BC. Sun Tzu was a military general. He was a military genius. The manual that he has written has been followed by military leaders and even held as state secrets for thousands of years. It wasn't until the 1700s it became popular. It didn't become popular, but it was translated into French in the West, but the translation was kind of dodgy, so it didn't really become popular until the 19th century when a man named Samuel Griffith translated it into English, and it became very popular. It's a comprehensive military strategy that talks about everything from understanding the land that you have to travel on, to understanding your supply chains, to understanding the various types of attacks that you can put on, the various type of defenses that you can expect to face from the enemy, and vice versa, the various types of defenses that you need to build in order to defend against the enemy. So it's a very comprehensive. It's so comprehensive, in fact, that it has principles in there that apply not only to the military, to the Army, but also to business and cybersecurity, and that's what we're going to be focusing on today. This manuscript is so well known that it's been referenced both in fiction and in history. We have fictional characters referring to the value of the art of war. It's been used in various games. General MacArthur had a copy of the art of war on his desk wherever he went. And in fact, most military installations throughout the world have a copy of the art of war in their library. So it's a very important work, and it's fitting that we should try to apply it to some of the things that we do in cybersecurity. We're going to tease out several different threads from the book. The original book has 13 chapters, and as I said, it goes into a lot of detail on different aspects. We don't have time to go into all of that detail today, but we're going to tease out some of the important threads that are really relevant to us. The first one that we're going to look at is know your terrain. Now, back in Sun Tzu's day, in order to know the terrain, you needed to have accurate maps. And in addition to that, you needed to have scouts that were out in the field, scouts that could report back to you any changes that might be occurring, any roads that might be getting built, or any walls that might be getting built. You needed to have up-to-date information. So you had scouts out there reporting back the actual conditions that are on the ground, even weather conditions. So in Sun Tzu's day, that's how he became familiar with the terrain that he was about to go over. Today we do something very similar, only instead of a map, we use a couple of different reports. One of them is called the DBIR, which is the Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report. And it's a pretty comprehensive report that's published annually. It comes out in the late spring. This one was published in May of 2020. But it covers the period of the previous year up through October. So the data in the current report goes through October of 2019. So you'll see some references to 2019 numbers, and that's why they collected the number, and then they spent several months putting the report together and analyzing it. One of the first numbers that stands out when you look at the DBIR is the number of confirmed breaches. In 2019, we had 4,000 confirmed breaches. Now, I need to take just a minute to tell you what a confirmed breach is, because there are many more thousand breaches than that. 4,000 seems like kind of a small number, but a breach is a security attack that was actually successful and can be confirmed to be successful. It's when they actually get money, or they actually destroy data or extract data and share it outright, and you can prove that that has been done. So there are many other attacks that happen that can't be confirmed, and sometimes they can't be confirmed because the attackers were really good at covering their tracks, which is one of the fundamental things that you do in a cyber attack. Once you are finished, you cover your tracks, you erase log entries so that you can't be discovered through a forensic analysis later on. Now, to give you an idea where that 4,000 number stands, like I said, it sounds like a pretty small number, but if we take a look through history and we look back at 2011, we see that it was just under 500 tracks, about 480 breaches that were confirmed in 2011. Now, that's almost a tenth, a little more than a tenth of where we're at right now. But you'll see that on looking at this graph, you'll notice that it wasn't until 2016 before that number was doubled. So it took 6 years for that number to double. But here's the interesting thing. When you look at 2016, which was roughly 1,000 breaches, it was 2,000 breaches by 2018. So it only took 2 years for it to double again. And then in 2019, it was double again. So this curve is shooting up exponentially, and we can expect many more to be reported in the 2020 year, especially with the conditions that we've had in 2020. As I said, there are a lot more than just 4,000 attacks that have been discovered and are reported and analyzed through the Data Breach Investigations Report. In fact, there have been 157,000 analyzed security incidents, and they do a thorough analysis of this, and this report gives you a lot of numbers, a lot of charts, a lot of graphs that show you not only the trends and averages, but it shows you by industry, it shows you by attack type, it shows you by the bad actor type. It really breaks down all of these incidents and gives you a really good feel for exactly what is out there in cyberspace that is presenting threats to us and actually acting on those threats so that we better understand how to manage our risk in our organizations. One thing that is becoming increasingly clear, and this is a trend that's been going on for maybe 10 or 15 years, is that these attacks are no longer dominated by script kiddies. You'll remember back in the early days of hacking started off as a way for programmers and engineers to really try to discover capabilities that weren't supposed to be in a system. So they were trying to get the machines to do more than what they were actually designed to do. And in a lot of cases they did that, and a lot of cases that meant breaking authentication, that meant sharing files that weren't meant to be shared, and things like that. Well, they were engineers and programmers, and they were the original hackers. They wanted to share their information with the world, so they started putting their code up on the internet for people to get. And then came along the next generation, which were script kiddies, and they didn't really know how to do those things themselves, but they knew enough to take the code that the hackers had created, download it, and apply it to other organizations or to other things. So then attackers became your script kiddies, your 14-year-old kids that were breaking into military installations, not because they knew how, but because they knew how to use somebody else's code. And what we're finding now is that those two classes have all but disappeared, and they've been replaced really by cyber criminals. And cyber criminals are the people who are carrying out most of the attacks. And these are, we'll talk more about the organizations in a minute, but these are professional, organized people that are carrying these attacks out, and they're not just trying to kick the tires, trying to see what they can figure out. They're actually using proven techniques in order to get money from you. And because we are so advanced and progressive with our technology, we're constantly coming up with new ways of using technology. And as we do that, our attack surface is expanding. Every time a new technology comes out, whether it's the Internet of Things or the cloud or some of this automation and AI, there are people that are working to exploit those technologies and to leverage them. And they really have two motivations for the most part. And these are financial and espionage. The biggest motivator by far is financial. They're looking for ways to make money, either by extorting money from you or by stealing money, from accounts, or by selling your information to somebody else. And that ties into espionage a lot of times. A lot of times a cyber criminal will use these hacking techniques to break into a system in order to sell their data to one of their competitors. So there's a lot of detail in the data breach investigations report, and I've just skimmed the surface, but it goes into a lot of detail and categorizes a lot of these attacks and a lot of the effects. There's another report, though, that's produced in Europe by Europol. It's the Internet Organized Crime Threat Assessment, and it's produced, or it's called IOCTA, or that's the name for it. And the one that is produced in 2020 actually just came out not long ago, just a few weeks ago. And it is up to date in that it includes information about COVID and how COVID is being exploited. If the one difference that I see between these two reports, they both, are kind of looking at the same type of information, but the Internet Organized Crime Threat Assessment is really more of a qualitative report than a quantitative report, where the DBIR is looking at lots of numbers and graphs and charts. The IOCTA is actually interviewing people and getting more narrative stories about incidents that have occurred. So there's a different feel for the information you get from the IOCTA report, although of course they're looking at the same types of incidents, so a lot of their information is similar. And one of the things they agree on is that cybercrime is evolving, and it's evolving rapidly, and it's growing in all areas. Now, there may be a particular attack of some sort that is a little bit behind, or that falls to the wayside because it's not being used as effectively, but it will always come back. These attacks that disappear for a while just go dormant, and at some point down the road they're resurrected so that they can be used in another attack in a slightly different form possibly. One of the things that's clear is that cybercrime is now not just a thing in and of itself, but now it's actually a tool that is being used in order to create other types of crimes that aren't traditionally thought of as cyber crimes. Now they're using cyber crimes, including the reconnaissance and phishing and things like that, in order to establish themselves in an area where they can commit a more traditional crime that doesn't involve computers necessarily, but almost always involves money, of course. Money and power, those are the two big motivators. I mentioned that COVID is being exploited, and this report talks a lot about that. They go into a lot of analysis about how phishing scams are being built, around the concept of COVID, and how it is, they're tugging at people's heartstrings, looking for people to donate money to causes that are supposed to be able to help with COVID victims, or to support development of medications and things like that. Just anything that they can do. If they use the word COVID, a good-hearted person is going to want to respond to that. Another thing that COVID has done is it's caused us all to work remotely a lot more, and that means we're accessing our corporate files from our personal computers, and generally speaking, our personal computers are not going to have the same security protocols applied to them. We may not be doing updates as often as our security team would like us to do in the office. There may be a lot of problems with our personal computers. So if an organization can get into a personal computer, they may find that they have a way of accessing accessing your corporate data as well. Again, the top motivations for this are financial and espionage. The next thread we're going to look at is know the enemy. Sun Tzu says, if you know your enemy and you know yourself, you're not going to have to fear a loss in 100 battles. But if you don't know your enemy and you don't know yourself, you are not going to know victory. So knowing your enemy is an important concept, both in military actions and in cyberspace. So let's talk about who it is that we're dealing with. Well, first of all, we've talked about this a minute ago, is that we're talking about criminal organizations again. We're not talking about script kiddies or hackers trying to explore the limits of their technology. We're talking about people that are actively engaged in criminal activity, and they're not just individuals. They're not just one person who wants to go out and commit a bunch of crimes, they're organizations. They have departments. They have finance departments and IT departments and security departments. They have everything that a good organization practicing good governance has. It's just that they are completely criminal in their intent and what they're doing. The next group of people we don't see as often because they have a real focus on government and on critical infrastructure. So people in business may not ever experience anything with state actors. That's not a, you know, just because you're in business like hospitality doesn't mean you won't ever see a state actor trying to get into your system. But for the most part, state actors know what they're going after. They're trying to compromise, you know, some piece of infrastructure, whether it's a power grid or getting access to power plants or getting access to election information or whatever it might be. These people have a next level of malice in their intent. And if you work in a government organization or you work in a something that deals with the critical infrastructure of your country, then you are going to be dealing with state actors trying to get in and do something. Now, whether they're state or criminal organizations, any particular attack is generally carried out by a fairly small team. So somebody like, if you're being attacked, you might have like 3 or 4 people that are involved in penetrating your defenses, getting through and compromising one of your servers and maybe planting a backdoor and maybe even getting root on one of your systems. And then they'll hand that off to another team who will then take it from there and pick up, and they'll start doing whatever their specialty is, for whether it's lateral exploration or actually targeting some of the systems that are in there, depending on where they're at in their reconnaissance process. But typically speaking, the people that are involved in any one part of an attack are pretty small teams. The attackers are mostly external attackers. In the old days, we used to say that, you know, most of the problems came from insiders, and I guess that was probably true for a little while, but since then the percentage of insiders has been going down, and there's still about 25% of insiders, that's employees of the company, who are attacking their own resources or posing a threat to those resources. But for the most part, it's external. It's people that know nothing about the company that are working on compromising it and gaining. And a lot of the reason for that is the motivation. So now that we know who the enemy is, let's talk about what they're doing and talk about some of their strengths and weaknesses. And actually, we'll look at their strengths and weaknesses through what it is that they're doing. Well, one of the most prominent things that they're doing, one of the most active attacks is social engineering, and this comes in a variety of forms. Phishing is the most common, and when I would give presentations like this before, I would kind of throw out the offhanded comment that everybody knows what phishing is. But you know what? I've stopped doing that because so many times phishing attacks are successful. People are getting emails that, you know, lead them to a bank or talk to them to tell them a story about something, and they end up falling for it, and they compromise either themselves and their own finances or their company, and they fall for it all the time. So obviously people don't understand phishing as much as they need to. We really need to learn to educate everybody about phishing, about clicking on links that they find in their emails or anywhere else. But that is by far the most common. Pretexting is it's similar. All of these are, you know, basically different forms of con jobs. And pretexting is developing the scenario, and it usually is something that plays out face to face, either in person or over the phone, where a person presents themselves as somebody that they're not in order to gain access into your environment. One that's very common is you might get a call from somebody in the help desk that is, or maybe even somebody who claims to be from their security department in your organization, and they're telling you that there's something wrong with your system. It looks like maybe you were attacked, and they need to get access to it so they can find out what is wrong, what is going on, and who might be, you know, trying to steal your data. And they sell that to you in such a way that you become convinced, and they might give you a story that, like, I'm having trouble trying to access it. Can you go in here and change these settings and click on this link, and that'll give me access to your machine? Well, it sure does give them access to the machine, and they use it for, you know, whatever, to plant whatever software they want or extract whatever information they want. So that's pretexting. Vishing is it starts with a voicemail for the most part, and you've probably all gotten voicemails like this. Somebody will call up and say, this is Officer so-and-so, and I'm with this government agency, and you've been named in case number 912734625, and we've been trying to get a hold of you. If you don't respond immediately, you're going to be faced with legal action, or an arrest warrant is going to be issued, or the IRS is going to come down on your head. Something horrible is going to happen if you don't respond immediately. So you call the number that they give you, and you give them the case number that they left, and then they proceed in going through a process of getting information from you in order to steal your identity and use it. So that's very, very common. Smishing is another one that's gaining popularity, and that's similar to the phishing, only it's using SMS. And I've got an example here. This I got just a few weeks ago. I got an alert on my text that said, our records indicate you may have $377.88 in funds owed to you. Verify here. Well, if you click on the link, they ask you some personal information that only you would know in order to verify who you are. And then they use that information to go to your bank account or wherever else they want to go to steal your identity and compromise you. And so that's what smishing looks like. Most of you have probably seen those as well. Ransomware is up, but it's up in a strange way. We are losing more and more money to ransomware events, but there are fewer and fewer ransomware events occurring. And that's because when ransomware first came out, everybody was getting it. It was, you know, happening on your mother's computer, on your uncle's computer, and you had to go help them get cleaned up. But they were asking for thousands of dollars, and in most cases, no, the individuals that were getting this weren't about to pay that. So they just you know, wiped their system clean and reinstall, and that was the end of that. But now what they've done is they've started using a new technique of auctioning your data. So before they encrypt your data, they copy everything off and they set it up on an auction site, and they say, okay, this is going on auction, and you have 48 hours to reclaim it. If you want to reclaim it, here's the special price that you can get it for. Otherwise, it's going to the highest bidder in 48 hours. Well, that's going to freak you out, and if you've got anything sensitive on your computer that you don't want somebody else having, you're certainly going to want to do something to stop that. The best thing you can do, though, is nothing. Don't allow don't pay the ransom. Instead, contact authorities immediately and try to get them moving on it. Credential theft is up. Just last week, 226 million email address and password pairs were stolen. And I know this because I got an alert saying that my address was one of those. And maybe you did too. There's 226 million is a lot of email addresses. But my email address was stolen from a guitar site that I use. And fortunately, I don't reuse passwords. So the password that I used on that site is not going to work anywhere else in the world. So I don't have to be concerned about my system being compromised or other accounts being compromised. But that highlights the reason why you don't want to use the same password for multiple websites. And finally, errors are up. Errors can be configuration errors. They can be things like failing to update your system, allowing your virus definitions to go out of date and not doing anything about them. Or they can be errors in source code, in the programs and apps that you're running. I started off life as a developer and software engineer, so it's kind of sad that errors continue to be on the rise. You would think that with all of our smarts and all of our technologies, we'd be able to reduce the error rate, but it doesn't seem like we're doing that very well. The third strand that we're going to tease out of this is know yourself. And this is important that you know your own capabilities, whether you are fighting a war or whether you are engaged in cyber defenses. So let's look at who are the good guys, who are the defensive people that are keeping our system safe. First of all, in our corporate world, we have blue teams, red teams, and ethical hackers. The blue teams are the people that are configuring the alerts. They're monitoring the logs. They're creating the snort rules. They're trying to identify what bad traffic looks like and put that on so that they can put those into the rules so that your systems will be protected. The red teams are on the other side. They try to look at it from a hacker's perspective, and they try to attack all of the defenses that your blue teams establish. And when they are able to compromise the system or get in, then they let the blue teams know, and the blue teams can then update their defenses. On a larger scale, we have the Department of Homeland Security here in the US, and there's an agency called the Cyber Infrastructure Security Agency, and they're dedicated to cyber security and to securing everything that goes on in America regarding the internet and regarding internet crime. The FBI also has a program. It has investigators. This website is called the IC3, and it's the Internet Crime Complaint Center, and that's where you can go and you can fill out a form and you can say, I believe that I've been breached. This is the information I have about it, and the FBI will take a look at it, and they may deem that it warrants an investigation, and they may help you out. That's the FBI's version. There's a European version that's run by Europol, and that's called the EC3, or the European Cyber Criminal Center, yes. And they are the investigators that are responsible for investigating all reports of internet crime. So your own country, I know there are a lot of people that are joining us that are not in Europe or America. Your own countries may have similar institutions. Always, if you're not sure, always start with your local law enforcement agencies, and they will direct you to where you need to go. But the very most important defensive actor that we have, that any of us have, the one that is most critical to us staying safe is you. That's right, you are the most critical actor in your own defense. You are the one who controls how well you get defended. So Sun Tzu says, know your own strengths and weaknesses. So let's talk about what we as individuals can do. First of all, we can engage in personal hygiene. And by that, I'm not talking about showering. I'm talking about maintaining good security over our own passwords, making sure that our own systems are up to date, making sure that we have the proper antivirus tools running and that they're up to date. Making sure we're not sharing information with people that don't deserve the trust to share them. And for me, there's a lot of things that I love my wife. I trust her with my life, but there are things relating to the computer that I don't share with her because I don't want her to be in the position of being a part of a compromise. So you need to take your personal responsibility for your own personal security in many, many ways. And there are many things that you can do to do that. User training, I look at this from two angles. First of all, from a user. Users will get regular security training. Everybody's got a security awareness program, and they all have to go through it. And sometimes they have to, sit through a presentation. A lot of times they're looking at their phone while they're sitting through the presentation, or they're not really paying attention. They're doing just what they have to do in order to get the check mark so they can show the HR that they actually, they attended the class. That's not good enough. You need to really try to understand what the security people are telling you, and you need to question them. And one of the things that you can do is if something is boring or not being presented well, you can tell them, I fell asleep during this section. How can you make it better for me? The other thing that companies need to do is they need to harden their financial and HR teams, because these are the most common targets. And when I say harden them, they need to amp up the training for these teams, and they also need to make sure that the hardware itself is hardened, because again, these are the keys to the kingdom. This is where your attackers are going to be going for. And then trust but verify. Use technical controls to support your administrative controls. So if you have a policy that says you can't have a password that's more than 90 days old, then don't allow them to have a password that's more than 90 days old. Force them to change it. If you don't, then they're going to begin to ignore all of your suggestions, and they're going to think that everything that you say is optional. You need to report suspected breaches immediately. Again, is your local law enforcement. If you don't have a better answer, start there, and they will guide you to the right place. So here's what we've talked about today. We've talked about the fact that the need for cybersecurity is increasing. This is not a time for complacency. This is a time for all of us to get our stuff together. We need to think strategically. Tactics alone aren't enough. We can't just buy a product and think that that product is going to keep us safe. And whether we're in our home, our office, or a company, we each have a part to do that can help us be more secure as individuals and also the people around us. And finally, we learned that our 21st century struggle with cybersecurity can be informed by a 2,500-year-old manuscript called The Art of War. Thank you. I will be around for questions. Again, my name is Dennis Houchin, and I'd be happy to talk to you.